Een eerste uitnodiging wees hij van de hand. Ik denk niet dat ik de juiste persoon ben voor dit thema. Een tweede uitnodiging, dat bent u wel, maar u weet het nog niet, nam hij aan. Hij is bijna schuw, niet genegen om persoonlijke vragen te beantwoorden, is me van tevoren gezegd. Dat beeld zal niet blijken te kloppen.
For me, a work of fiction exists only insofar as it affords me what I shall bluntly call aesthetic bliss. That is, a sense of being somehow, somewhere connected with other states of being where art, curiosity, tenderness, kindness, ecstasy is the norm.
Alleen zolang het over filosofie gaat, kun je hem tot een redelijk aangenaam gesprek verleiden. Alleen dan. Maar zelfs dan moet je nog verdomd je best doen. Is me gezegd door mensen die hem zeggen te kennen. Welnu, ook dat zal niet waar blijken. Ook al lijkt het even zo te gaan. De eerste 15 minuten.
I confess I do not believe in time. I like to fold my magic carpet after use in such a way as to superimpose one part of the pattern upon another, let visitors trip. And the highest enjoyment of timelessness in a landscape selected at random is when I stand among rare butterflies and their food plants. This is ecstasy, and behind the ecstasy is something else, which is hard to explain. It is like a momentary vacuum into which rushes all that I love, a sense of oneness with sun and stone, a thrill of gratitude to whom it may concern, to the contrapuntal genius of human fate, or to tender ghosts humoring a lucky mortal.
What kind of child were you at primary school? How would you describe yourself?
Shy, withdrawn, ingrown, constantly afraid of being beaten up in the schoolyard, not playing much of a role in any activities, hoping to get away from school as soon as I could.
Why? Because it was...
I just felt awkward and, unable to join in things.
For what reason? Because...
Don't know. It's just a fairly early memory of being asocial.
The schoolyard, do you remember? You're standing alone, or...
Yeah, actually, my memories aren't very strong until about the age of 8 or 7 or 8, something like that, and I was always being moved from school to school. I think I went to 7 or 8 different primary schools, and in each one I would always sort of wonder if I were going to make any friends, and then never did.
But do you know why? The shyness.
Don't know.
Where did it come from? Did it accompany you all your life, or just in childhood?
I've never been very easy in my dealings with people. I mean, I'm a lot better than when I was a child, but still, I tend to avoid parties because I can't think of any small talk to make.
Do you remember, because if you're talking about yourself as a shy boy, escaping into schoolyards, escaping the others in the classrooms, going from school to school 7 or 8 times, you might suppose that there's somebody who reads books in the silence of his room at home. Am I correct?
Yeah. Yeah, according to my parents, I pretty much taught myself to read when I was 4 or thereabouts, and, spent most of the rest of my life reading books.
The world in those books, was it perhaps more important to you than the world outside?
Yeah, much more. The world outside never quite lived up to the books, except for a few scenes in nature, animals, birds, flowers.
What kind of world were you creating by reading books and combining them? To what kind of picture you?
Well, fantasies of power, control, omnipotence, sort of usual childhood fantasies. turning out to be the unacknowledged son of the king, that kind of thing.
Power,
Yeah.
control. The control and power you missed dearly at schoolyard.
Mm-hmm. And I think basically I was looking for some way to get back at the schoolyard bullies by turning into some kind of intellectual and acquiring some kind of intellectual power, though I wasn't quite clear how this was going to work.
Did you manage
Sorry?
to come back to them as the intellectual?
No, I just lost touch with them by living in a world of intellectuals.
During adulthood, after primary school, the situation remained the same. That's to say, you escaping the vulgarity of all daily life and entering into the world of books and fantasy.
Well, actually, I was very lucky because when I was 15, I went to the university, and it was a particular program in a particular university where nobody talked about anything except books. So it was, it was ideal for me, and it was the first situation in which I felt more or less at ease and in control of things.
Was there any feeling you had at that time in your childhood or later in your adulthood that you had to become a philosopher?
I think philosophy was somewhat accidental. I mean, I think that I could equally well have become an intellectual historian or a literary critic, but it just happened that the course that I was most intrigued by when I was 16 was a philosophy course, and so I sort of kept taking more and more philosophy courses and signing up for more and more degrees. And
why were you intrigued? Because of a...
I think because of the sense of mastery and control that you get out of philosophical ideas. You get the impression from reading philosophy that now you can place everything in order or in a neat arrangement or something like that, and this gratifies one's need for domination
and compensation of the shyness.
Yeah.
I remember that not a very few, but very many people who are participating in Beauty and Consolation, if I ask them what is beauty, what is consolation, what is the marriage between them, they come up with the sense of ordering, the sense to have the whole chaotic world in your own hands, to control it, to name it. Is this something?
I guess I don't associate that with beauty.
No.
I think of it as I don't know, something much more like power than like beauty. And I think of beauty as sensuous and of philosophical ideas as, in the usual cliche terms, cold, hard, abstract, non-sensuous.
What world were you gradually discovering the time you went into philosophy? Because you had the illusion of having everything under control, in power.
Well, of hoping to anyway, by
yeah.
reading enough philosophy, so that, when I was 16, I read through Plato, thinking that, if I read everything in Plato, I would sort of get the essential Plato and be in command of this, sprawling mass of dialogues. And of course, it didn't work out that way because Plato is too good an author to let himself be controlled in that way. But, it was a good try. And then I just kept on going, sort of reading philosophy books until it was too late to do anything else.
Yeah, too late to do anything else.
Well, but when I was 20, I had a master's in philosophy, and couldn't think of anything to do except take a doctorate in philosophy. And then when I got a doctorate in philosophy, there wasn't much to do except teach philosophy. So.
But you wanted to be in control. You were the shy boy from the schoolyard.
Mm-hmm.
When did you realize you shouldn't manage?
Oh, sometime in my 20s, I think, when I began to think that philosophical ideas were, so to speak, ingenious artifacts rather than levers of power.
Was this a dramatic moment? Because I can imagine that if you have your illusions about philosophy as a kind of ordering the world and to lead your own chaotic world, to have it in your own hand, and to discover that you're just playing with toys and not with...
It's not exactly just, I mean, it wasn't a sense of just playing with toys, but of the feeling that philosophical systems were, more like that writing such systems was more like contributing to a literary genre than like assuming command of the universe. It wasn't anything very sudden. I mean, just somewhere between the age of 20 and the age of 35, but I couldn't tell you where.
And what happened once you realized? You didn't say, I quit.
No.
You continued.
It was my bread and butter.
That simple?
Sure. I mean, teaching philosophy is a very agreeable occupation. You get a lot of spare time. It pays well. You can do pretty much what you want, especially after you get tenure. Never occurred to me to
leave
change my life. But I began writing somewhat different kinds of stuff, and eventually it got more and more different as the years went by. I've never found philosophy books consolatory, except in the sense of occasionally being overwhelmed by a surge of admiration for a particular philosophical work and thinking, how nice it is.
The construction of it.
Yeah, that it's what a brilliant imaginative creation. How nice to be in the same world with people who can create something like that, and to be able to appreciate what they've done.
But this is not consolation. This is a kind of admiration.
Yeah, it's not consolation for loss or despair or anything. It's just consolatory works. They tend to be, poetic or fictional achievements more often than philosophical works.
Tegenover je zit de peetvader van de postmodernistische filosofie. Ook al heeft hij zelf van die term, postmodernisme, een pesthekel. Nadat hij de schoonheid van de filosofie gedefinieerd heeft als hard, abstract, koud en niet sensueel, volgt de apotheose. Filosofie bedrijft hij alleen omdat de kachel nou eenmaal moet branden. En dat filosofie een bron zou kunnen zijn van troost? Nou nee. We blijken ook helemaal op de verkeerde plek te zitten. In een studio waar nog geen mier wil wezen. Waar zelfs een kakkerlak doodgaat van verveling. Hier hadden we moeten zijn. Tussen de orchideeën, de vogels, de vlinders.
What's that
Probably a cardinal in the woods somewhere. The waxwings were eating the berries of that bush there, and in the fall they often eat the berries from vines that have fermented, and they get completely drunk and fall on the ground, intoxicated.
And they're dead? Or?
No, they're just had too much alcohol. They recover in half an hour.
Richard Rorty belichaamt zo ongeveer de hedendaagse westerse filosofie. Dat diezelfde filosofie voor hem alleen een bron van kille schoonheid is en al helemaal niet van troost. Dat is zo'n onverhoedse mededeling dat ik de verkeerde weg blijf bewandelen. Die van de filosofie. In de verkeerde omgeving, de studio. Rorty blijft geduldig antwoorden. In de verkeerde omgeving. Postmodernisme. Wat betekent dat? Ja, betekent het überhaupt iets?
I've tried to avoid the term. I used it once sort of as a joke. I wrote an article called Postmodernist Bourgeois Liberalism, just thinking that would annoy people by being a sort of oxymoron. But I've always found it a useless term. I wouldn't know how to define it or even how to use it. Nowadays, you can use it to mean something like Derrida, Foucault, Lyotard, and various other Frenchmen, and people will get the illusion. But as far as the philosophical ideas go, the ideas that are called postmodern seem to me to have been perfectly well formulated by about 1910, the time of the death of William James. So, postmodernism doesn't seem a very appropriate term.
Well, we leave postmodernity behind. If you call yourself a pragmatist philosopher, what do you mean?
Pragmatists say we should stop thinking in Greek terms, not think in terms of a distinction between appearance and reality, or between mind and body, or between intellect and sense, but think of ourselves in the wake of Darwin as what Nietzsche called clever animals who find cleverer and cleverer ways of talking about what's going on and clever ways of dealing with what's going on, but never do anything like penetrating beyond the world of the senses, or penetrating beyond appearance to reality, or ascending from the body to the mind, or anything of that sort. And much of pragmatism is just the same kind of criticism as you get in Heidegger's criticism of what he called the ontotheological tradition.
Filosofie. Rorty's hoofd zit vol vlinders, orchideeën, vogels. Maar monter gaan we verder. Nu over de definitie van het begrip waarheid. Alsof Rorty het daarover hebben wil.
I think it was unfortunate that pragmatism became thought of as a theory or definition of truth. I think it would have been better if the pragmatists had said, we can tell you about justification, but we can't tell you about truth. There's nothing to be said about it. That is, we know how we justify beliefs. We know that the adjective true is the word we apply to the beliefs that we've justified. We know that a belief can be true without being justified. That's about all we know about truth. And justification is relative to an audience and to a range of truth candidates. Truth isn't relative to anything. Just because it isn't relative to anything, there's nothing to be said about it. And truth with a capital T is sort of like God. There's not much you can say about God. That's why theologians talk about ineffability. Contemporary pragmatists tend to say the word true is indefinable, but none the worse for that. We know how to use it. We don't have to define it.
If you define it in the Nietzschean term, there are no facts, there are only interpretations.
Yeah, that gives the general pragmatist idea that no description, or if you like, no interpretation, is closer to reality than any other. Some of them are more useful for some purposes than others, but that's about all you can say. And Nietzschean perspectivism, which says, you can't rise above interpretations and get to facts, or dig down below interpretations and get to facts, is substantially the same thing as I meant before when I said that pragmatists try to get rid of the reality-appearance distinction.
En voort gaan we nog even op de verkeerde weg, in de verkeerde omgeving. Nu over het begrip onzekerheid.
See, I guess I don't want to talk about the uncertainty inherent in the life of every human being. I mean, some human beings lead quite certain, predictable lives. People in traditional societies, people in such miserable conditions that they have to work 14 hours a day and sleep the rest. There isn't much uncertainty around. I think that uncertainty, in the sense in which philosophers dramatize uncertainty, is a luxury. It's the kind of thing you can deliberately induce in yourself for the sheer thrill of it by reading lots of different books and being uncertain about which of them to believe.
Your shyness at the schoolyard wasn't an existential one.
No, I think
less social.
No, more pathological than existential.
And now you're freed of it, more or less.
More or less, yeah.
Yeah, you could handle people later on.
De zin van het leven. Waarom is het zo langzamerhand zinloos je die vraag nog te stellen? Naast Rorty liggen de 4 boeken die hij heeft meegenomen. Ze gaan niet over filosofie.
The idea is, the Greek idea is that at a certain point in the process of inquiry, you come to rest because you've reached the goal. And the pragmatists are saying, we haven't the slightest idea what it would be like to reach the goal. The idea that the aim of inquiry is, conformity to correspondence to reality, or seeing the face of God, or substituting facts for interpretations, is one that we just can't make any use of. All we really know about is how to exchange justifications of our beliefs and desires with other human beings, and as far as we can see, that will be what human life will be like forever. So pragmatists regard the Platonist attempt to get away from time into eternity, or get away from conversation into certainty, as a product of an age of human history where life on Earth was so desperate and it seemed so unlikely that life could ever be better that people took refuge in another world. Pragmatism comes along with things like the French Revolution and industrial technology, all the things that made the 19th century believe in progress. When you think that the aim of life is to make things better for our descendants rather than to reach outside of history and time, it alters your sense of what philosophy is good for. In the Platonist and theistic epoch, the point of philosophy was to get you out of this mess into a better place. And
God, heaven,
the realm of Platonic ideas, the contemplative life, something like that. Yeah. And the reaction against this Greek Christian pursuit of blessedness through union with a natural order is to say there isn't any natural order, but there is the possibility of a better life for our great-great-great-grandchildren. That's enough to give you, all the meaning or inspiration or whatever that you could use. Hans Blumenberg, in a remark that impressed me enormously, said, at some point we stopped hoping for immortality and in place started hoping for our great-great-grandchildren. This was a sort of turn in the culture of the West. And, I really believe that. I think that it had to do with simple improvement of material conditions. When we got a comfortable bourgeois existence for, large numbers of people, the bourgeoisie was able to think not about escape from the world and pie in the sky, but about creating a future world for future mortals. This seems to me to have been, a great improvement.
Daags voor onze ontmoeting e-mailde Rorty me: we kunnen over van alles van gedachten wisselen. Maar mag ik het ook over Nabokov hebben? Wat me fascineert zodra het over schoonheid, troost en Nabokov gaat, is zijn voortdurende herhaling. Dat een landschap, of het kleurenspel op een vlindervleugel, of de vorm van een blad, voldoende troost zijn voor zeeën van menselijk lijden. We veranderen van onderwerp, al blijven we in de verkeerde omgeving zitten. Nabokov, sneeuwuilen, valken, orchideeën, schoonheid, gruwelijkheid. Filosofie, zal dat woord nog vallen, al is het terloops tijdens het vervolg van het gesprek?
That's a cedar waxwing sitting on the bow there. There it goes.
Oh, there it goes.
Yeah. It's on the underneath. Well, you have a different species in Europe. This is the bird with which Nabokov begins his novel Pale Fire.
Oh, yes? What does he write about it?
It's a poem that begins, I was the shadow of the waxwing slain in the false azure of the window pane. It's a sort of allegory of the life of the poet.
What does he mean by it?
Birds kill themselves by flying into glass windows. They see the sky reflected in the window, and they can't tell it isn't the real sky, so they smash themselves into the window pane. And so Nabokov builds a big story about the dead waxwing and the difference between reality and appearance, and seeing things in mirrors and seeing them in reality, that kind of thing. So it makes waxwings a sort of romantic bird. There's another one.
You wrote what I find interesting about Nabokov and the subject of Beauty and Consolation is his constant reiteration that the landscape or the iridescence of a butterfly's wing or the shape of a leaf is sufficient consolation for oceans of human suffering. Well, let's later on talk about Nabokov, but first about you.
Yeah, I don't believe that it is sufficient consolation. On the other hand, I'm not sure anything else is either. And so I guess I think of such things as coming closest. I mean, it seems
close as you can come to Beauty and Consolation.
Well, I think such experiences are as close as I can imagine to finding consolation in the world for the pain in the world. I think they were for Nabokov too. Are they really consolatory? Should they really be consolatory? I just don't know. I think Nabokov didn't know either.
Well, try to come back, because in your childhood or adulthood, do you remember certain moments that you were terribly afraid or frightened or sad or miserable? And that a butterfly's wing of a certain landscape, a snake going by, was a real consolation? No,
I don't think there was ever any correlation between bad moments and good moments. That is, I don't think the good moments ever lifted me out of any particular bad situation. The good moments, I think, sort of just came along accidentally, unpredictably, with no relation to anything else.
Unnoticed, simply there.
And would recur in memory as something nice that happened once. For instance, I'm a bird watcher, and one of the nice things about bird watching is that the first time you see a certain species of bird, it tends to stick in your mind. Mm-hmm. So you have sort of slides you can show yourself of, the first time you ever saw a snowy owl, the first time you ever saw a Goliath heron, the first time you ever saw a certain hummingbird, that kind of thing, so that you have a sort of stock of, beautiful things, consolatory images, always in your head. When I was something like 12 in a canoe going along a river, and there was this absolutely astonishing white bird sitting on a stone by the river, unlike any bird I'd ever seen before, but because I had pored over Audubon's Birds of America, I knew exactly what it was, and the ability to recognize it as the bird portrayed by Audubon was somehow very important. Here I am actually in the presence of what Audubon described.
It was its beauty and a kind of ordering species.
And that it was, it's like coming upon a great historic monument. You come around a curve in the road and there is the Taj Mahal, something like that.
Yeah.
It's, if you'd never heard about it before, it wouldn't be the same as if, it was the thing you'd read about all your life.
And the hummingbird?
Same kind of thing. I can remember watching hummingbirds in my parents' garden, and then the first time I saw it, we only have one kind of hummingbird in the eastern United States, and I can remember the first time I saw a certain kind that appears in California up on a hillside overlooking the sea, and the first time I saw a tropical hummingbird on a feeder in Costa Rica, and that sort of thing.
What you say is remarkable, because you say if you don't know about a snowy owl or a hummingbird, it's insignificant at the moment you see it. At the moment you know what you're ordering, what you're seeing, what you're meeting,
it has to be, as Kant would say, synthesized by a concept before it works.
A bird watcher. You've been that all your life? Or?
Last 30 years, maybe, half of my life.
Wow.
But I was fascinated by birds when I was young. That was why I read Audubon all the time.
What did you do? Where did you live? In New York, or?
Half the time in New York City, half the time way out in the country in a little farming village.
And there's where you discovered
That's where I saw
the birds?
The birds, yeah. Birds and the flowers.
What did you do?
Mainly, I didn't have a pair of binoculars, so I couldn't do much with birds, but I made myself a specialist in certain kinds of wildflowers, the domestic orchids of the eastern United States. And my hobby was to go, sort of spend all day ranging the woods looking for orchids, because they're quite hard to find, and I prided myself on being the only person who knew where you could find them.
There is a similarity with Nabokov, more than you think.
Yeah. Well,
You talked about a little similarity, but...
Well, for him it was butterflies, of course.
Yeah,
for me it
for
was
you it
orchids.
was flowers,
Same
birds.
general idea, yeah. They had to be rare. There's a description in Nabokov's autobiography where he talks about the ecstasy of being among certain rare butterflies high up in the Rockies. And the rarity is important, just as the rarity of these wild orchids was important, or the rarity of the snowy owl. The particular places where certain orchids grow, I will probably never forget.
Why not?
They were too important. They were sort of the, what Nabokov calls the hidden nodes of one's life. The places to which one, somehow give you your coordinates or something like that. I mean, the landscape of my childhood is sort of, is sort of pricked with little points of light where various kinds of orchids grew on the sides of various mountains.
Did you talk with others about the orchids, or was it your little?
It was my little thing.
Closed.
Yeah.
Unit.
Yeah.
You didn't want to.
A secret world.
But why? Were you afraid that others would damage it? Or?
I don't know. Either I thought they wouldn't understand, or they couldn't understand, or they would laugh. I'm not quite sure which.
Can you give any description of this world of, for instance, not only the birds but the orchids? What kind of a universe you were creating? What kind of a silent, secret world you were living in?
Well, can I read a passage in Nabokov about that? I mean, that's there's a famous passage in the afterword to Lolita where he says, "For me, a work of fiction exists only insofar as it affords me what I shall bluntly call aesthetic bliss, that is, a sense of being somehow, somewhere connected with other states of being, where art, parenthesis, curiosity, tenderness, kindness, ecstasy, close parenthesis, is the norm." This is a sentence I keep quoting and returning to in my writing because it's, it perfectly expresses a child's sense of the secret world. I think that, there is a place somewhere where, tout n'est qu'ordre, beauté, luxe, calme et volupté, something like that.
What is true for Nabokov is true for you.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not sure I'd call it the only source of consolation, but the only one that I'd describe as beauty as opposed to love. I mean, other human beings are consolatory, obviously, because you love them, they love you, that kind of thing. But that's different. I mean, beauty doesn't, so to speak, come into it. At least not in the sense in which Nabokov is just talking about it here.
No, if I connect beauty to human beings, you say?
Well, some human beings are beautiful, but that's not the point, so to speak.
That's not the beauty you.
Yeah,
beauty that's internalized.
Right. Yeah. I mean, my paradigm cases of beauty are birds and flowers and landscapes, not people.
Yeah, if you're alone or you're miserable or you're down and out, you don't go to a bar or a cafe, or
Right.
you go to the birds, the flowers, the landscapes.
Yeah, exactly.
And what are you doing at that very moment? Sitting, looking, or
Trying to get back in touch with this, sense of being somehow, somewhere connected with other states of being where art is the norm.
Yeah, but if Nabokov writes about those other states of being where art, curiosity, tenderness, kindness, ecstasy is the norm. Those are curiosity, I understand, tenderness, kindness, ecstasy. Do you find this in birds, landscapes,
Yeah.
flowers?
He found it in butterflies. He uses the word ecstasy about being with the rare butterflies.
And you, together with the orchids, you could use the word ecstasy.
Mm-hmm.
Can you describe it, or are words not capable of?
No, you have sort of, chains of near synonyms, fascination, awe, intense concentration, but it's not exactly a description, it's just flailing around.
Can you sit for hours looking at one orchid?
No, I just don't have much of an attention span.
Oh, 5 minutes, a minute? Or...
Well, 5 minutes would be the maximum.
Yeah? And then this wonderful beauty...
Then I need some other new thrill.
A trill, another orchid.
Another orchid, another bird. Yeah.
Yeah, I understand.
Is it really sufficient consolation? I don't think. I have no idea how you could answer the question. And
well, you can, because if you're going out in the country, you're looking at the hummingbirds, the orchids, and I ask you at that very moment, is this sufficient consolation for oceans of human suffering or for the suffering in your own life?
Yeah, I'm tempted to say no, of course not. What could be? On the other hand, I think there's a difference between, sometimes, of course, you get consoled for something specific by something else specific, I didn't win the lottery, but I did get a promotion. I didn't get a promotion, but I didn't win the lottery, something like that. One is a consolation for the other. But they're sort of the same order. Yeah. Happy events, unhappy events. Oceans of human suffering just has no... there's no way to get back and forth between that and orchids and hummingbirds. There's as big a gap as you can imagine, so there's no commensuration. And yet people like Nabokov are always insisting, there has to be some commensuration somehow. And I think that the pathos or the interest of Nabokov's work is largely a matter of insisting that there's a relation, even though nobody could figure out what the relation could possibly be.
But the attempt, you understand the attempt perfectly?
It's not exactly an attempt. It's just sort of...
No, he's convinced.
It's just sort of going back and forth continually between these small private moments and, human history as a history of horror. And going back and forth between the beauty of the landscape and the intense suffering of a person within the landscape. That's what he spends most of his time at.
Yeah. Did he realize any of it? Did he make the connection? Or did he fail finally?
Well, I think he made it about as well as anybody's ever made it. But if you ask me what connection he established, I couldn't tell you. He managed to write books with two foci, intense suffering and ecstasy. And there's nothing you can say about the relation between them, but somehow you think you know more about both when you read his books. Nabokov, I think, would have liked there to be no distinction between the aesthetic and the moral, because he was good at the aesthetic and was appalled by the moral, so to speak. But obviously there is a distinction. That is, morality has to do with relieving suffering. The aesthetic has to do with, what you do when the demand to relieve suffering lets up for a while. And I can't remember the context in which I wrote that, if I did, but I think what I was trying to get at was some people who are good at what Kant called, the aesthetic, not a very happy term, can simply abstract from responsibilities to others, interest in human suffering. Some people pretend to, some people actually can. It's hard to say about people like Baudelaire and Wilde who pretended to. Maybe they succeeded, maybe they didn't. Nabokov certainly never succeeded. That is, he was always, going back and forth, and was always tempted by the metaphysical suggestion that really pain is an illusion, sort of the combination of Christian Science and Bishop Berkeley, matter and pain and time aren't really there. And knowing perfectly well this was nonsense, but nonetheless always being aware of the attraction. And, I think from reading Nabokov, because of reading Nabokov, I found myself writing a book about the distinction between the private and the public, where the public meant something like Kant's moral and the private meant something like Kant's aesthetic. As I say, I don't like Kant's terminology very much, but better than nothing.
Would you say that pure beauty exists? I think I know the answer, but...
I think of the Platonic emphasis on purity as... the emphasis on purity seems to me characteristic of what Nietzsche called the ascetic priest and a bad thing. It was an impulse I felt very strongly when I was young, and then as I went along, I began writing essays against the very idea of purity. I began to agree with Freud and Nietzsche that the quest for purity was sick.
Why?
That there's something sadistic, sadomasochistic about it. I can't explain it very well, but Freud and Nietzsche are always saying, beware of the man who wants purity, keep out of his way. These people are dangerous. And they're right. And it's, there's a kind of ruthlessness that comes from this desire that I think is perfectly real. And I don't, for instance, think that purity had any role in Nabokov's life. I don't think that was one of his ideals. There's nothing ascetic about it.
So pure beauty?
It's, pure anything seems to me, just a
thread leading to sentimentalism? Or...
Well, I can't distinguish it from a philosophical view. The philosophical view which I've come to adopt and which I think of as ingredient in pragmatism is everything is what it is by virtue of its relations to everything else. There isn't, you can't and shouldn't try to capture X in its purity because there isn't anything to X except those relationships. And so whenever I think about the subject of purity, I sort of translate it into metaphysical terms and contrast the metaphysical quest for purity and, the ineffability of God, the ineffability of the Platonic forms, the non-relationality, the non-expressibility, the unrepresentability, and so forth. I contrast this as the frantic effort of the ascetic priest to cleanse himself with what Freud thought of as, the healthier attitude that, we're all dirty, we always will be dirty, and it doesn't matter.
Reading Lolita, what was the sensation? Or wasn't there any sensation involved yet?
Just the overwhelming sense of a book unlike any book I'd ever read, written in a manner I would never have been able to imagine by an author who was, perfectly in control of his own style and, never hit a wrong note, set himself an impossible task and carried it off with complete success. It seemed to me just astounding.
And the story itself?
The story itself...
Wasn't that important, or?
It was and it wasn't. I think that's one of the fascinating things about Nabokov, because the story itself is usually about intense pain, great cruelty, enormous humiliation, and all told told with such extraordinary charm, beauty, that, you're constantly torn between attending to the pain of the characters and attending to the glory of the style. I think Nabokov was, completely aware of this tension and deliberately used it in writing his books, inducing it deliberately in his readers.
It is clear, you're right, that the only thing which could really get Nabokov down was the fear of being or having been cruel. Does the same apply to you?
Yeah, that's certainly true for both of us. I can still remember things I've done to other people, 30 or 40 years ago, that are, that the emotions of shame and guilt are so intense that I just instantly try to distract my attention. Yeah, it isn't that I can remember inflicting deliberate pain on anybody. It's that it's just acts of omission. Of it would have been so easy to have done something for her, or it would have been so easy to be kind and I wasn't, or something like that. And I think of Nabokov as having had endless, self-reproachful memories of this sort. Yeah, I find them permanent companions,
They didn't disappear.
No, I can't exactly be consoled for them. I can only be distracted.
But are those moments you remember vividly, so to say? Well, not every day, but as a permanent.
Yeah. Or, if not exactly moments, at least the face of someone for whom I could have done a kindness at an important moment and didn't.
What do you really mean with the synthesis of ecstasy and kindness you're looking for?
I have no idea what it would be like, but a way of being simultaneously kind and clever, or a way of not having to choose between cleverness and kindness. I just desperately hope to avoid the problems. I can't imagine what a solution is like.
Your childhood, is it in any way comparable to Nabokov's?
No, not in the least. Well, no, that's a little overstated. I mean, Nabokov had, he always claimed, an incredibly happy childhood, and psychoanalytically oriented people always tell you that's a sign he must have been pretty miserable. And in this case, however, I believe Nabokov. I mean, I think it was just as glorious as he remembered it as being. And I think the only similarities between his childhood and mine were the sort of Wordsworthian moments of, bliss acquired by a landscape or an object in a landscape or, some contact with nature. It's the theme of Wordsworth, the early books of Wordsworth's prelude, of the Ode on the Intimations of Immortality. It's what made Wordsworth famous, that in childhood you were able to be in touch with landscapes, animals, flowers, trees, mountains, lakes, in a way that you'll never be again. Shadows of the prison house close about the growing boy.
Do you have any more descriptions of what you call the silent universe of your childhood, or the hummingbird, the orchid, the landscape you're totally alone in?
I can quote this thing from the autobiography about the butterflies. He has the two concluding paragraphs of chapter 6 of Speak Memory are about passing through some pine groves in the Rockies, and the next moment I was among them, over the small shrubs of bog bilberry with fruit of a dim dreamy blue, over the brown eyes of stagnant water, over moss and mire, over the flower spikes of the fragrant bog orchid. A dusky little fritillary bearing the name of a Norse goddess passed in low skimming flight. And in the next paragraph he says, I confess I do not believe in time. I like to fold my magic carpet after use in such a way as to superimpose one part of the pattern upon another, let visitors trip. And the highest enjoyment of timelessness in a landscape selected at random is when I stand among rare butterflies and their food plants. This is ecstasy, and behind the ecstasy is something else which is hard to explain. It is like a momentary vacuum into which rushes all that I love, a sense of oneness with sun and stone, a thrill of gratitude to whom it may concern, to the contrapuntal genius of human fate, or to tender ghosts humoring a lucky mortal. That's about as metaphysical and speculative as Nabokov ever gets, which is to say, not very, just a few sentences here and there. Like Freud, he had really not much interest in philosophy and no particular trust in it, but every once in a while he would, let himself go in this way. But it's passages like that that, gave me a sort of fellow feeling with him, since I felt I knew, exactly what he was talking about, and Wordsworth would have known too. I just don't have sort of supreme moments in my life that I look back on. I look back on things with satisfaction, but not with a memory of ecstasy.
Never?
No, I can remember that it was a Wordsworthian moment. It was, a Proustian moment of happiness. But I remember it under that abstract description rather than, as it were, being back there.
There was a kind of ecstasy, but you don't remember it. It's a Proustian experience or the Nabokov experience. But
I can't recapture it. I can only, remember that.
As you forget pain, for instance? As you forget pain.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
You forget your ecstasy.
Yeah.
That's a lot,
Yeah.
I think.
Well, people have often said it's a great mercy that we can't remember what it was like to experience the pain later on, and after torture you can't recapture having been tortured. I take it for the same reason after ecstasy you can't remember ecstasy.
What should be the existential reason that you forget about pain? Well, I can imagine what it is to forget about pain, but about ecstasy.
Well, you don't forget about it, but you can't bring it back. You don't forget being tortured either, I take it. But
No, of course. But what's the evolutionary reason, you think, that you can't bring it back, the same feeling?
I don't know. It's the way we're built. Presumably there's an evolutionary reason for all the ways we're built, but I don't, I'm not sure it pays to speculate.
We are forgetting about beauty and ecstasy, because otherwise we are getting bored. If we can remember it time and time again, could be a reason.
You mean we've evolved in such a way as to avoid that kind of boredom, or, you know, sounds plausible.
Forgetting about pain is the opposite, but in fact the same reason.
Yeah, I mean, my hunch is that, you know, if there's ever a neurophysiological account of these matters, it will turn out to be the same account for both cases.
Yeah, for beauty and cruelty and suffering.
Yeah. That, you know, that intense experiences can't be recaptured, because if they were, the brain would crack up or something like that.
Yeah, but even if you try to recapture those moments of beauty, consolation, ecstasy, you can't.
I think, you know, the people who are successful don't recapture them, they create new ones. I mean, what Nabokov was able to do was to produce these Haussmannian tingles by simply writing in himself and others. And if you can do that, it sort of doesn't matter whether you can recapture or not.
Well, aren't you jealous? Somebody sitting at his table, Nabokov, creating his own.
Absolutely. You know, you know, the whole phenomenon of people being able to write the kind of line that, you know, makes the hair on the back of your neck stand up seems to me, you know, so impressive that, you know, I'm not only envious, I'm, you know, contemplating a miracle. I have no idea how it could be done. But I can imagine people just find themselves doing it.
Sitting at the desk.
Yeah.
Reliving their memories.
No, just writing.
Reconstructing them.
No, I'm not. I mean, it seems to me when somebody writes a line which haunts people forever, they don't know they're reconstructing memories or something like that. I mean, there's a standard example in the books on these matters, a line by a bishop who wrote a lot of poems. Nobody ever knows, nobody has the slightest idea who he was. And, I mean, they know, but they don't care, or what other poems he wrote. But he wrote the line about Petra, a rose-red city half as old as time. You know, that's the only line anybody ever knows, but it's enough. You know, it made him immortal. He didn't have the slightest idea he was doing anything special, I bet, when he wrote the line. You know, he wasn't reconstructing a memory. He wasn't doing anything in particular. He was just writing, and suddenly, you know, it worked. And, you know, Nabokov was able to do that over and over and over again. So was Keats. So were a lot of people.
And you tried, but you didn't manage.
You can't try. I mean, you know, I don't think the notion of trying applies.
But you tried.
Well, you know, I write all the time. You know, if I could write lines like that, I bet you I would. But I don't, and you know, I wouldn't know how to try.
What's the most beautiful bird you can think of?
Again, I mean, that's a little like, you know.
The most fascinating bird.
No,
I don't say beautiful.
It can't be done. I mean, you know, the most beautiful falcon, the most beautiful songbird, maybe. But you know, it's like the most beautiful painting. You might be able to say the most beautiful landscape, the most beautiful portrait, but you couldn't do it painting überhaupt. It's, you know, and you know. The most beautiful falcon I've ever seen is the American kestrel.
Why?
Just the you know, the incredible subtlety of the colors and the pattern of flight. It's a remarkable combination. But you know, I have no way of putting it together with a hummingbird. I mean, they're just two. I mean, they're both birds, but that's about all they have in common.
What's one of the most beautiful orchids you ever saw? Or beautiful? This is a dangerous word, I know. Most fascinating because of its colors or its fragrance or.
I suppose the smaller yellow lady slipper, it's called Cypripedium parviflorum, which I once found growing in the hills of New Jersey. It's just it's a lady slipper, a compact little yellow sort of cup.
Well, and if you try to catch her in words, and no deal.
Nope. Purely visual.
You can show it and then that's all.
Sorry?
You can show it and that's it.
Yeah.
It tells its own story.
Yeah.
Any idea how, for instance, Nabokov would have described, for instance, your hummingbird or snow owl?
He might never have noticed it. I mean, he wasn't
No.
much of a bird man.
No.
I mean, you have to be. It takes a lot of preparation to notice the little yellow lady slipper. It takes a lot of preparation to notice the American kestrel. I mean, yeah, there has to be a lot of build-up and stage setting. I once was in Yucatan looking at the Mayan ruins with a friend, and we were both interested in the ruins, but it just happened there's a particular bird down there which is incredibly common called the motmot, which has a very long tail culminating in iridescent blue circles. My friend simply hadn't noticed there were any birds around. I mean, I'd sort of noticed nothing but. I could barely see the ruins for the birds. He honestly didn't know there were birds. Well, why should he? He just hadn't crossed his mind. And it wasn't that he was dumb or stupid or anything. He just hadn't been trained in birds. I had. All birds look the same to him. The way all performances of the same symphony sound the same to me.
Beauty and Consolation, are they as intense as they are fleeting?
Yeah. I mean, they're
Necessarily.
Presumably they're fleeting just because they are intense.
Can you imagine yourself sitting in this wonderful Arcadia with your flowers, the landscape, the birds, and for instance, for 1 week or a month?
No, but on the other hand, I can take consolation in the thought that such places may still exist, even if all the human beings die off horribly. And there's a controversy between a couple of philosophers, I can't quite remember who now, about whether it would be a better world after the atomic bombs have eliminated all the other forms of life on Earth, if there were one single rose bush still flowering, and the kind of thing philosophers argue about. It seems to me perfectly obvious it would be a better world if there were one single rose bush left around, and that would be a consolation for the death of the human race. But I can't. I haven't got any good reason why that would be a consolation, whereas the survival of 1 million cockroaches wouldn't be a consolation. Cockroaches aren't beautiful, roses are.